We will listen to a man who had an interesting couple of years, to say the least, the last couple of years. He's the former managing director of rFactor 2, the simulator we will be using in the final. And now he is the developer of a complete new sim racing platform. He will talk all about it. You're a sim racer yourself. You nearly love sim racing as much as your dog, as you have. We will have a great insight about this new software platform. So, give a round of applause. Marcel Offermans.
Thank you all very much for being here today. I mean, it's a huge audience here, so it's great to stand in front of all of you. A little bit intimidating, but I'll manage, I hope. And I want to spend the next roughly half hour to talk a little bit about my personal perspective on sim racing, where it came from, where we're going to, and also touch on some of the things that I want to do differently in my next simulation. And those two are obviously related, but before I start talking about that, I want to give a brief introduction in my road to being here. What have I done in the past? As René already said, I was the managing director of Studio 397. We were developing rFactor 2. We took over that development from ImageSpace Incorporated back in the day. And as part of that, we also did a partnership with Amazon Games in Seattle, building the Grand Tour game with them. It's probably a game you haven't played much. It was trying to do something differently. You know, the Grand Tour is a TV show, sort of the follow-up of Top Gear. And they wanted to make a game that followed a whole season of the TV show by releasing new episodes of the game as new episodes of the TV show were released, and doing all of that on consoles. And that turned out to be quite tricky to pull off because you have all the approval processes in consoles, and if you want to release something new every week or every 2 weeks, that's quite a challenge. And the other challenge they had is when the game started, there weren't any episodes yet, so there wasn't much content, so people started reviewing the game and they were like, there's nothing in it yet. And you try to explain, yeah, that's the whole point of things, that will come later, but they didn't get that, so people were reviewing it and saying, yeah, there's not much to do. So that didn't work out too well in the end, but it was a great experience because we worked with a few international teams getting all of that done. So that was fun. Before that, I helped ISI a little bit with the rFactor engine, bringing it to Steam, and also helping the Reisa Studios building the first Automobilista title, where I did some of the software developments to enhance the rFactor 1 engine with some dynamic road aspects and some of the other things. So done quite a few of those things. NASCAR Ignition is another game that we worked on. We provided the physics engine for that as part of Motorsport Games. I must say that's also a game that didn't get too many good reviews in the end, for many reasons I won't get into now, but also those things do give you a lot of experience, and it was a lot of fun working with those developers and trying to make something good out of it. So that's a bit of my background, and before that I have roughly 20 years experience in IT, doing anything from cloud development to embedded to real-time, and before that it's almost in another life. I studied mechanical engineering at the Delft University of Technology, so I have a bit of a technical background there as well, and that certainly helps me with stuff like vehicle dynamics and things. So that's a bit about me. But let's now move on to racing simulation and its evolution through the years. And I want to first take a few steps back in time to some of the first racing games that were out there and the technology that they were built on back in the day. And I'm not sure if people out here are familiar with something called Moore's Law. I see some questions and some... Moore's Law is not really a law, it's more like an empirical thing, and it's based on experience, and It goes like this. It says every 2 years the number of transistors in a computer double, which could be roughly translated to its speed doubling every 2 years. And especially in the early days of computer, that was true, and that was a very simple process. You had a CPU in your computer, and that became faster every couple of years. And some of you who experienced those old-time PCs still remember you had computers and they had this turbo button on them. And that was done because computers got faster, but a lot of people wrote software that didn't actually take that into account. So the software went faster as well. If you made a racing game, suddenly your lap times would halve because your computer ran twice as fast. So they had to put a button on there to go back to normal speed so everything would work. I mean, that's a long time ago. We've since learned how to cope with different computer speeds. And also, the way in which computers are sped up is completely different nowadays from those days. Man. In those days, it was just your CPU got faster, and therefore everything ran faster. Right now, it's your CPU gets even more cores, and they have fast cores and slow cores, and they get combined in all kinds of ways. And we get graphics cards, and graphics cards themselves internally have even more cores, and they can do some things in parallel, like really, really quickly. So the way in which computers have been sped up is completely different from the early days. And that has a huge impact also in the software development, because usually you had a program and it would just run faster on a faster machine. But with all these cores and different elements, you really have to program differently to take advantage of that. And that brings us back to simulations as well, because racing simulations, a lot of them have been developed like almost 20 years ago. If you look at some of the established platforms like iRacing and rFactor, they all date back to almost the beginning of the century, right? Around 2000, those platforms were created. And they were all created with computers in mind that were still in the turbo button age, so to speak. So they weren't really designed to take advantage of multiple cores, of GPUs with lots of parallelism. And that means that evolving those engines over all those years and keeping them relevant even today becomes a lot harder, because all of them have not really been designed to be used this way. And if you're a programmer, you know that if you didn't design something to be used in a specific way, it's really hard to change it afterwards. Right? If you build a house, it's really hard to change the foundation under the house when the house is already standing on top of it. You're just not going to be able to do that. So that was also one of the first things I wanted to make sure, that when I'm starting a new platform, I take advantage of the fact that computers have changed over time, and I need to do a lot more in parallel. But maybe the more important lesson is that you need to make sure that whatever you build in a way more modular fashion, because things will change over time. What I'm talking about here, in 10 or 20 years from now, we will have different solutions, different problems, and we don't even know what those are yet. So what we need to make sure is that we design things for change. We don't know yet how it's going to change, but we know it is going to change. So some parts of what we build today will have to be built in a completely different way in 10 or 20 years from now. And you can take that into account when you start designing things. So that was my first motto. I need to make sure that everything I do is completely modular, and I can take stuff out and replace it with different technology when needed. And that goes for simple things like graphics engines. I mean, graphics changes all of the time. Nowadays, a lot of people are very enthusiastic about Unreal Engine, for example. Probably in 10 years from now, we'll talk about something else. And 10, 20 years back, we certainly had different graphics engines. So that kind of stuff needs to change. And another thing is the way cars are built is also changing rapidly over time. I mean, well, even in the past, we had crazy car designs like this sketch I have here of a Formula One car with 6 wheels, and I know some of you will recognize the classic design. So I want to make sure that also on the physics engine side, I'm more modular. I can build cars with 6 wheels or 3 wheels. They can have more than one motor. We can have electric motors and stuff. And that's also a big difference to some of the existing physics engines where a car has to have 4 wheels. That's just the only thing it was designed for. And most of them have that, so you're typically good, but things will change over time, so I need to take that into account. So that's very important for me going forward to take that into account. And yeah, graphics, I already talked a little bit about it. Those graphics engines change rapidly over time, and I talked a little bit about rFactor 2, about using that technology in the Grand Tour and using it in NASCAR 21. If you look at the rate of change of a physics engine, that will be the same, or roughly the same in the next 10 to 20 years, because physics doesn't change. The laws of nature will still be the laws of nature in 20 years. Sure, we might have some different algorithms that can deal with that a little bit more efficiently, but gravity is not going to change in 20 years. So that's pretty much a constant. Graphics engines do change over time. So you need to make sure that those two things are completely decoupled. I can throw away my graphics engine, plug a new one in if a better one comes available, or maybe we're going to run these things on like 5 different computers with 20 screens around you, or some new VR technology. So you need to have those things completely separated so you can evolve each of these modules at their own pace. Another interesting and important part of racing simulation is sound, and I've split that in two. I'm first going to talk a little bit about capturing sound, because that has its own real-life problems. I don't know if any of you ever tried to record the sounds of a racing car, but it's really hard. And it's really hard. Well, first of all, you need to get access to a racing car to even do that. Need permission to stick microphones in it. But even if you're allowed to do that, you run into the problem that once a car starts making sounds, it's all of the sounds at once. You hear the engine, you hear the drivetrain, you hear the wind noise, all of that stuff. And it's really hard to just isolate each individual sound so you can later record those and mix those back together for your simulation. So that's quite tricky, and people have been trying to find different ways to generate sound. And this image here is actually an engine simulator. It's a great open source project. I would encourage you to also take a look at some of the YouTube videos that this guy has made about it. He's actually simulating an engine as it's rotating and simulating the noises that it makes from the cylinders, from the ignition, from the crankshaft, everything. And he has been able to make a synthesizer that can make noises that are very similar to what a real engine with that specific design would sound like. And I mean, that's a whole simulation world in itself. It's probably not feasible to run that alongside a physics simulation and everything else that we're doing, but it could be a great way to at least generate sounds in a more convenient way than sticking microphones onto racing cars and trying to figure it out that way. So these are definitely techniques that people are looking at. I'm also still looking into that. If I'm totally honest, the sound side of the new simulation is probably not that advanced right now. I'm sort of on par with what the others are doing there, but I definitely want to make a few more steps. But there's some interesting new developments there that I want to take advantage of. And the other thing about sound is that it doesn't get generated in a vacuum, right? You have a race car, the engine makes noise, but it's not just about that, it's also how that noise gets reflected and absorbed by the environment. I still remember vividly the first time I went to a Formula One race at Spa-Francorchamps, a circuit that's in the hills, and you can hear the racing cars and you can hear the echoes and the backfires of the engines. You don't actually see the cars, but it's like this very impressive, slightly scary sounds that you hear. And it's a very unique sound experience, and that comes from all of the reflections. And so in a simulation also, you can't just say, okay, we have a car and it's this far away, so we'll just turn the volume down a bit and that's how the car sounds. No, the car also sounds differently because the environment around it is different. And you almost get a form of like ray tracing, but with sound waves, right? You have sound waves being emitted in all directions. They reflect, they get absorbed, and somewhere they come together at your ears, and that's what you hear. So that, again, is a very complex simulation you could run just to get the proper sounds in your simulation. And again, something that can be quite resource intensive to pull that off. But a very interesting area to see if you can use ray tracing like techniques there and sound as well. If maybe the parallelism of GPUs can help you generate sounds better in that way. So definitely also an area I'm going to do a lot of research in the next couple of years to see if we can make some steps there in just recreating that spa feeling, I would say. Then another point that I think if you look at the number of people selling hardware solutions here is super relevant, is hardware integration. And I think we're still in a pretty poor state there, and I don't say that to put anyone down or anything, but the interface between hardware and software hasn't really changed in the last 30 years. Anything that you plug into the PC is seen as a controller. It has buttons, it has some analog access. That's about it. So a lot of things that you use in your simulator have to go through that interface. And that's kind of okay for a steering wheel because that's really just the position of the wheel and you're fine with that. And it's obviously great for buttons that you have in your car. But if you want to, for example, simulate an H shifter and all of the details in that and the forces that you feel when you put the shifter into gear or try to pull it out of a gear with or without a clutch, those details you can't really model because an H shifter in its model in the software is just a bunch of buttons for each gear. And there's no motors or anything, there's nothing giving you any kind of force feedback, and there's not even a good way for the soft and hardware to integrate that in a meaningful way. So I think that's an area where we really have to step up, integrate hard and software better, and come with solutions that work better and allow us to get these feelings into things as well. And there's already some great things going on with force feedback. We have some really great active pedals nowadays from SimiCube, and I'm sure others will follow a similar thing. So we are moving ahead, but I think we can go even further there and create better solutions if we create better integrations. Other areas where you want to probably look at is if we want to merge the simulated world and the real world better, we should also look at simulating things like a CAN bus in a car, because that is the thing that hooks everything together in a real road and racing car. All the signals, all the data goes over that bus, and we're not even simulating that in our racing simulations. Why not? It would be great if we could do that, and we could actually take a CAN controller, put it in a PC, and hook up peripherals from the real racing world, like an ABS system or such a display from Bosch or anything like that, and merge those worlds a little bit forward. That would mean we can simulate things from the real world better and use that for testing in more ways. So that's another thing I'm focusing on and making sure that going forward we can add such systems as well. Another topic we have is online racing, and well, especially with us just surviving the pandemic together, that was a hot topic when everybody was racing from home and we had a lot of online competitions. It's sort of normalized a bit more now, but certainly esports is here to stay and we're sort of trying to define a good way forward for that. But one of the things that also hasn't changed much over all those years is the way we approach online racing. The architecture we had for that, like in the very early days where you have all kinds of PCs that all hook up to a central server and they race together on that server, that was something we had a long time ago and we still race like that. And the problem nowadays is we make longer races. We have like the 24-hour races. We do those races over the internet, and although the internet is great, it has a lot of bandwidth, it's super fast, it isn't 100% reliable. Things do occasionally glitch and fail, and we're still very much at the mercy of the internet staying perfectly fine for 24 hours, and if not, clients lose their connection, and they have to reconnect, and they lose a lap, or even worse. And people are trying to sabotage servers now and then. You have a denial of server attacks on specific events because people don't like it. And if a server gets attacked that way, the whole event might be compromised. And we still haven't found a way to work around that. And in other areas in networking, those problems have been solved. There's no reason why we have only one server and connect everybody just to the one server. We can have redundancy. We can have 3 servers and have people connect to all of them. So if one of them fails, there's still 2 others that can pick up and continue there. And I'm not going to say that's super easy. We'll fix that today and everything will be fine. Because it's a real-time system, so if you connect to multiple servers, you do have to make sure that they're all properly synchronized and that you don't really notice when you're driving that you're switching from one server to the next. But I am saying that we can do a lot better than what we're doing today, because today if the server goes down, it's game over and we're in red flag periods and we have to set up the server again, connect everybody, pretend as if this is something that happens in real life as well, and just continue as is. So that needs to be improved, and that's certainly an area I'm already experimenting with and making sure that that becomes much better going forward. I mean, it will never be 100%. It's always possible that something really fails, that someone cuts a cable, and then, yeah, if you try to fix that within a second, that's probably not going to work, but I think it can be a lot better than what we're doing today. So, and I think it needs to be as well. So, onto a topic that is probably something that, well, at least most sim developers don't really like to talk about too much. And that's a bit awkward. And the reason they don't want to talk about it too much is because cheat detection is something that is very hard to do. And the problem of cheating is very hard to solve. And if you don't have a solution to a problem, one way of dealing with it is just pretend it don't exist. And I think we've been doing a little bit of that over the last couple of years. I also think that most of you in the audience who've been in sim racing for a longer time know that this happens, and there are ways to do that. And it's not too difficult to imagine. I mean, you're running on a PC, it's running Windows, you can pretty much run any other program on that same machine, and it can influence the software that's running on there. And I'm not saying you need to like double the performance of a car to make it super fast, because that would be a little bit too obvious, and you probably don't get away with that. But it's the more subtle things, like if I were to add just a little bit of ABS or just a little bit of traction control or help a little bit with stability going out of a corner, that could be really good, and it might make that half a second of a difference every now and then. And those are things that are really hard to detect, because even if you were able to detect such things running on a PC alongside your sim, then another solution would be to just build that kind of software into your pedal set or into your steering wheel, or just buy a little Raspberry Pi and write a little algorithm on that. And that just plugs into the USB port as if it were a normal set of pedals. And from the software side, you can't see the difference. It's just a USB controller that does something. So these kinds of ways to gain an advantage are really hard to detect. And I don't have a solution for that today. I mean, the easy thing would be to say, yeah, we can't race on PCs and Windows anymore. We need to create our own pieces of hardware that are completely sealed off, like a console or maybe even something custom. But that's not just being practical. I mean, not everybody's gonna buy a special box to do sim racing. They have a PC, they wanna use that. So that's not going to work. So that's a hard problem to solve. Right now, also in other esports, you see similar issues. And the most common solution is to just say, well, let's just get everybody here together on a LAN. We control the PCs, so nobody can cheat. And that's an even playing ground, and we know there's nothing that people can do. But it's also not practical in this online world to say all of our esports is going to be in a LAN, on site. It would be great that esporters get to travel the world every week for new races, but it's not practical to do that either. So this is really an issue that we need to solve together, also to get to the next step in esports and make sure it's a fair, even playing field. And yeah, no solutions for that yet, but that's something we all need to work on to improve. And that brings us to esports, which is also kind of in an interesting situation right now, because we had a huge upswing of esports during the pandemic. Even real racers had to compete in esports because they couldn't go on the track and do real racing. I remember those early days at rFactor when I think for the first 13 weekends in a row we had non-stop events, and during the week we were just creating content, creating custom liveries, adding billboards to tracks for sponsors that we had signed the day before, and just trying to get ready, broadcast races on the weekends. We even had to learn really quickly how to do broadcasts to TV stations, which were a little bit different because they don't stream at 60 hertz and stuff like that, and we weren't used to that, so we want 50 hertz, but we can't make 50 out of 60, that looks really bad, so we had to sort of get a double setup. One thing that streamed everything in 50 hertz, one that streamed everything in 60 hertz, and then some crazy Dutch people wanted commentary in Dutch, and we did everything in English, so we had to double on those. So those were interesting times, and we only had a few days every time to improvise and get something going. But yeah, those were like the crazy days, and now we're a little bit more back to normal. I would say we're in a little bit of a downswing in terms of esports, because there's a lot of series in trouble right now. I've seen some esports teams like Burst Esports struggling a little bit, or even not surviving. So we're trying to find sort of the new normal, I would say. And I think we're getting there pretty soon, but yeah, it's certainly a situation where we have to take one step back and look at what we're doing together and see how we can proceed from there. I think ultimately what we need to keep doing is growing our community, making sure there's more of us, because esports only going to work if there's a lot of people participating in the sport. So we need to make sure that we grow that sport from the ground up and create a healthy base for people to drive. Maybe some esporters disagree and say, well, if there's less of us, there's more prize money for me. That's also true, so there's a balance there somewhere, but I think a broad base is a good starting point for that. So that sort of concludes my talk. I do want to invite all of you to try the new sim out. We're upstairs, room 1.8, the last garage. We have a demo running there. You can try 2 different cars on the track for yourself. And I'm very anxious to hear your feedback on how it's driving, what you think about the graphics, what you think about the sounds, just the whole package, and what we should do with it going forward. I'd like to thank you all for your attention, and have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you, Marcel.